Moving it along in our chapter on tribes, we're going to talk about in-groups and out-groups. Our social identity, which we were already talking about, things like our race, gender, class, sexual orientation, is part of our self-concept that comes from belonging to social groups. Social identity is tied to identification of in-groups and out-groups, people whom we perceive to be similar or dissimilar to ourselves. Okay, so with in-groups, those are the folks that are like us, people most like us. We care about our in-groups and are taught to socialize with people from this group. So I know that's a very broad statement, but generally speaking, that's the case. So if you, in a very simplistic way, if you are Jamaican Canadian, you may be encouraged within your cultural subgroup to hang out on the weekends with families and other children and so on that are from that culture, subculture. If you are, in terms of interests and stuff, a real sports-minded person, you're going to be perhaps encouraged to spend time with sports-minded people, part of your tribe, your in-group. We share the same point of references as to what is normal in communication and interaction often. We unconsciously understand the rules of the game. So think about different aspects of the iceberg and the culture. So we know the rules of the game when it comes to physical contact or how you talk to certain genders, that kind of thing. We are more willing to make sacrifices for our in-group. I think that's a very crucial point. And we do not always require equitable return from them. So we do for our people because we do for our people. We're not always expecting it right back at us. We just do it because we want to, because they're our people, our in-group. We tend towards generosity and a willingness to overlook mistakes as well by members of our in-group. And imagine that's not the same for people in our out-group. Our alertness to our in-group can be subtle but powerful. We have radar sensitivity to noticing strangers who are sharing something in common with us. In-groups can be fleeting. They can be arbitrary based on city that you live, sports you play, creating a positive sense of identity with that in-group. So you can imagine when we think of those examples, what kind of in-groups would be. If you live in Toronto, you like the Jays, that kind of thing. Results, in-group bias. So especially pronounced if we belong to high status groups of society. So in-group bias is more significant if we're in a high status group of society for our in-groups. Through a lifetime of being immersed in specific cultural patterns, the result is strong unconscious neural imprints. We intuitively sense what is normal in neurological underpinnings of our tribes. So efficiency is key design element of neural circuit. So this is a bit of brain science. The less our conscious mind is needed, the less energy is required to handle the task, and neural efficiency results in less awareness of, therefore, less control over some behaviors, actions, and choices. So our brain has a way of making things easy for us, but it might not be helpful when it comes to race and diversity. So the out-group, those not like us, people we view as different from ourselves. And so we have our in-group and we have our out-group. Because often we have not been taught to socialize with members of our out-groups, we may feel uncomfortable in their presence. There might be because of our socialization and culture experience, we may simply be uncomfortable because we haven't spent time with people that might be in that out-group. Out-group members are perceived as all the same. So when we're in a certain in-group, when we look at an out-group, we perceive them with this big cookie cutter of sameness. It's really easy to recognize the nuances between individuals, though, within our own in-group. So you don't do as much of that cookie cutter in your in-group. You see the individuals in the space. With out-groups, you do a big, huge cookie cutter. And so an example might be facial features. If we have not been socialized in an environment with East Asian people, it may be difficult for us to see the differences and nuances between folks from Vietnam, China, or Japanese ethnicity. So if that's our out group, we might say they all look the same, which is simply not true, okay? But there's a big clustering that can happen to out groups. Not much respect for that, the nuances, region to region. So rules of social interaction relationships may feel less clear with out-group members creating really potential conscious or unconscious anxiety. So discomfort, tilting away. Our unconscious processes, which look for familiar patterns, struggle to comprehend outgroup behavior and environments. So the conscious mind has to be engaged, which requires greater effort and energy. So some people just walk away, right? The result is tendency of greater frustration and confusion in communication with outgroup members. They just don't even try. If you're in, your whatever your in-group is, and you are in a situation where you should be maybe working with an outgroup, you might just go, you know what, let's just skip it. Our conscious mind's desire to avoid outgroup, and this desire can be quite significant. So everything is more work when engaging with outgroup members, because it's against our grain, it's against the neural wiring that we have. We already feel like we're under stress, that never feels great, so we're harsher in our judgments, we are less forgiving, and we expect more in return from outgroup. So it gets complicated. Why? So social norms are emotionally loaded, and outgroup behavior disrupts our sense of what is normal. It doesn't fit with our norm. So therefore, it's stressing us out. We don't know what to do with it, and we get very judgmental. Social norms are often only visible when they're breached by outgroup behavior. This outgroup violation of norm evokes an emotional reaction by the in-group. So the example I've used before was the handshake. A conservative Muslim person may not handshake non-family members of the opposite sex, and some will be offended by this norm. It's like, well, you can think of all the kind of microaggressions that someone might say about someone that isn't part of their culture to shake hands. So a woman from Muslim culture that chooses not to shake hands, for example, with the basketball coach of their son, that basketball coach could be all offended and say, well, forget it then, I'm not even going to bother interacting with this person. And that is, that's an outgroup, in-group kind of reaction. Okay. So we'll leave that there for a moment.